She had it all.
Beautiful, blonde, vivacious, bubbly.
She worked hard and well with everyone and lived for the moments she spent with her family.
She was just love.
But there was something dark hiding in the shadows of Sin City.
She was posed like a Barbie doll, the exception being that her head was completely covered in blood.
Who could have done this? She didn't have an enemy in the world.
Boyfriend, husband, or it could be our worst nightmare. Do we have a sexual predator?
Police were looking for that one piece of information that could really crack this case wide open.
We have her checking out of the Palms at 3:01 and finding her dead body at 9:13. So that is the time we're looking at to identify who committed this murder.
A detective's greatest enemy is the clock. To solve a murder, they must reconstruct every moment of the victim's final hours. That's where the truth hides and a killer lurks. It's a warm Saturday morning when a local firefighter and his daughter pull up to a townhome in an upscale Las Vegas suburb.
Baby, go outside. Go wait for Daddy outside.
911 emergency status.
Police, I think I need to report a break-in and a murder.
Okay, to what address?
Willowbrook Apartments.
Okay, and what's going on there?
My wife is on the floor, bloody, stiff, not moving.
At 9:13, a call comes into our 911 dispatch. It's George TFA reporting that he found his wife deceased inside the residence.
He sent patrol officers to the scene. It's a pretty horrific scene.
Got a 187, Caucasian female.
They determined that it appeared to be a murder, and homicide was called.
George TFA? Hi, I'm Detective Miller.
George TFA and his daughter Maddie are interviewed outside the home. They tell police the victim is Shauna TFA, George's wife, and Maddie's mother. Lead homicide detective Dan Long arrives on scene roughly an hour after Shauna's body is discovered.
The two-car garage door was wide open, so I entered through the garage. I can see Shauna, her hair is pushed up, so she had been dragged. Her legs were completely straight, and she was laying perfectly straight up.
She looked like she was posed like a Barbie doll, the exception being that her head was completely covered in blood.
Coming home straight.
She was wearing a uniform for the Palms Casino, and she had taken massive damage to her head. Her fingers are broken and split open, and there's a lot of spatter from blows to the face.
From the nature of the wounds, you could tell that there was a claw hammer, and then around her body there were small splinters of wood, which suggested to us that the hammer had broke during the attack.
You didn't hear anything funny, odd in the last week or two?
Neighbors are shocked that such a brutal crime could happen in their quiet community.
Shauna lived in townhomes in Summerlin, which is one of our higher-end communities here in Las Vegas. Certainly, while everywhere has crime, you wouldn't expect to see a murder in this area.
Even more shocking is that such a vicious attack could happen to a woman like Shauna.
Beautiful, blonde, vivacious, bubbly. She was always laughing and smiling.
Everybody that knows Shauna loved her. She's beautiful. She's a cocktail waitress. She's making really good money. George is a valet parker at the Palms. They meet, they start a relationship, and she winds up getting pregnant. After she gets pregnant, they decide that they're going to get married, and the two of them are like the perfect couple together.
She was a great mom, She was very devoted, and she loved her family, especially her daughter.
Her 8-year-old daughter actually saw her mother. So this is going to be traumatic for her entire life.
Shauna's body is taken to the medical examiner while investigators continue their search of the crime scene.
There was electronics next to the body. So the first thing you're thinking is, why didn't they rob the place?
We couldn't find her wedding ring and her cell phone. But other than that, it looked like somebody had been targeting her.
There are no signs of forced entry, leaving detectives to focus on who had a motive to kill Shauna.
So do we have someone who she knows or she let in?
The amount of rage that was used, and without the obvious robbery, would indicate that there's some attachment to the killer. Boyfriend, husband, stalker.
Husband in this case was the person who reported Shauna Tiafe's death. 2 homicide detectives take him into a patrol vehicle, and they, what we call roll tape, but they take a voluntary tape statement from him.
So we went inside, and she was lying on the floor. And she was covered in blood. And I saw Shauna's feet just laying there, frozen. And in my job, I know what that means. I just want to die.
George does not have the credentials to be a killer. Never been involved in a crime. A West Point grad, someone who was in the Army Corps of Engineers, who traveled to other countries to help people. Then he became a firefighter and rushed to people's aid.
George and Shauna had been married for almost 7 years.
You look at either one of them individually, and then as a couple, it even goes to the next level. Everybody loved her. Firefighters spoke highly of George. These are not the people that wind up killing each other in domestic discord.
So are you gonna tell your mom about all the fun we had this weekend?
George admits their marriage had recently been rocky. He filed for divorce earlier that year, but withdrew those papers as their relationship improved.
Okay.
Bye.
We took a little break, and we're planning on moving back in together. She told me she loves me and that she wants our family to work. And I love her.
So he gives them an accounting of his night, the various runs that the fire department went on. He was there with them throughout the whole night.
See you next week.
All right, Phoebe. Tells them about going to the grocery store, going to his mother's house to pick up his 8-year-old who had slept there because Shauna had to work.
Bye-bye, sweetie.
And he had to work.
I love you.
The police go and talk to the firefighters. They go to the grocery store, and there he is on video. So everything he tells the police checks out. There was no time for him to have committed this crime.
Thank you, George.
Detective Miller finished the interview with George Tiafe and came and told me that he is not our suspect.
He's got a solid alibi. He worked 24 hours at the firehouse.
Shauna's still wearing her outfit, so police officers immediately respond to the Palms. They gather video of Shauna. It shows that she clocked out at 3:01 in the morning. There's a camera on the clock, and she's carrying a Victoria's Secret's pink bag with her. So that's the last we see of Shauna Tiafe.
Timelines for homicide is very important. So we have Shauna Tiafe checking out of the Palms at 3:01. And George Tiafe finding her dead body at 09:13 hours. So that is the time we're looking at to identify the murderer of Shauna Tiafe.
Hours after Shauna's body is found, investigators interview Shauna's co-workers at the Palms. They uncover a shocking detail about Shauna's personal life.
What we learned was that Shauna had a boyfriend.
Over there.
That works there in the pit, a man by the name of Todd.
Nearly a third of all our homicides are domestic violence related. And so when you find out that somebody has a intimate relationship with someone, that makes them a suspect.
So detectives talk to Todd. It's not a comfortable interview, but he is very forthcoming. He tells us that they've had sexual relations.
Did George Tiafe know about the affair? Or was this something Shauna and her boyfriend were hiding?
Where were you the night of September 29th?
He didn't leave the Palms at the same time. He gave DNA, gave statements, and provided an alibi, which we confirmed. So he is not our suspect.
More than 24 hours into the investigation, detectives have no suspects and no leads. It leaves police with a terrifying prospect.
So the next thing is, do we have a stalker?
It is a highly unusual event for a stranger to kill another stranger. And it's also the hardest possible crime to solve. Who wants this person dead? And if you can figure that out, you can usually figure out who killed them. In a stranger on stranger crime, you can't do the usual victimology. And police know their odds of solving a crime like this go way down.
So we're back to our worst nightmare. Do we have a sexual predator?
Someone has brutally murdered Shauna Tiafe, mother of an 8-year-old girl and wife of a local firefighter. With no suspects and no leads, police are left fearing the worst.
So the next thing is, do we have a stalker? Is there somebody that always comes to her at work that is maybe a little creepy?
She was a cocktail waitress at the casino, and when you have someone who interacts with that many people on any given night, it's a needle in a haystack. You're talking tourists, perhaps a worldwide search for someone in any given day or time that someone's here visiting Las Vegas. That's a huge task to try and undertake.
To better understand the timeline of the murder, detectives clocked the time it would have taken her to drive home from work.
We have Shauna Tiafe checking out of the Palms at 3:01. We have her walking on surveillance video to her car, and I believe it takes 7 minutes for her to drive away. So she drives away from the Palms at about 3:08 in the morning.
It's a 20-minute drive, so she should have arrived home about 3:30 in the morning.
So we're looking for anything seen, heard, anything at that point. I had as many detectives as I could contacting neighbors.
It was like a thud.
Shauna shared a common wall with her next door neighbor, who reported that about 3:30 in the morning, she heard a thump and her dog was barking at the wall, and she just assumed it was Shauna coming home. But that coincides with the time period we believe Shauna arrived home. It had to happen after 3:30, and certainly before 9:13. Another neighbor indicated that sometime before 7 a.m. they had left and the garage door was open to Shauna's garage. When George and his daughter arrive on scene at 9:13, the garage door is also up. So our theory is that the killer left through the garage. We've narrowed down between 3:30 and 7 a.m. at the latest.
By the end of day one, investigators have narrowed their timeline, but have no viable suspects.
We found fingerprints. Now we don't know who they belong to. We have DNA. There was a lot of DNA. We found her teeth, her fingernails. She bled a lot during this attack.
There was a lot of pressure to solve this case, and a lot of people had the same fear that perhaps this is someone who's maybe targeting women or casino workers. So police poured every resource you can imagine.
They were processing the scene like I've never seen a scene processed before. They fingerprinted everything in the house. They were swabbing anything that could possibly have DNA on it in the hopes of just getting some clue, somewhere to go with the investigation.
Based on the surveillance footage from the Palms, detectives at the crime scene now believe some items are missing.
We knew she's carrying a Victoria's Secret's pink bag with her, as well as her tips, which she kept in a Crown Royal bag. When we were at her residence, we noticed that the Crown Royal bag was missing and the pink bag was missing.
Although Shauna's electronics weren't taken, detectives still can't rule out a burglary gone wrong. Then, on the afternoon after Shauna's body is found, a neighbor finds evidence that could change the trajectory of the investigation.
Excuse me, yes?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but...
Brenda Jacobs came to our scene, and she does a run every day where the freeway is.
So it's in this area?
Yes, this is where I run.
She had located an ID belonging to Shauna Tiafe, a cell phone, a makeup bag, and some other assorted items. At this point, what this has given us is that the suspect is left not in a vehicle, but on foot. So proximity, where does he live? Where is he going? Did he park nearby? So the detectives now are going to fan out. We know that he went south. So each one of those has to be impounded, processed for evidence. We tested the block wall. We printed the phone, and we collected about 10 cigarette butts, lighters from that area. And then we'd locate a Gatorade bottle and latex gloves, so we impound those. My crime scene analysts are losing their minds. But in a crime like this, where we have a female murdered inside of her own home, it's gonna cause a panic.
The one thing we never found was the pink bag, the Crown Royal bag, or her tips from that evening.
Under mounting pressure to produce a suspect and growing fear that a sexual predator is on the loose, Detective Long releases information to the press during the first 24 hours of the investigation.
I was wondering if maybe you could enlighten me with some information that maybe you reported.
We put out that we had a female dead inside of the house. We don't know the reason for the attack. There didn't appear to be forced entry.
Typically, they won't release a lot of information, but police are looking for that one piece of information, that one person that could come forward and really crack this case wide open.
On September 30th, the day after Shauna's body is discovered, a mystery man comes forward with stunning information.
I was out along I-215 when one of the other detectives came up to me and advised that tips are coming in.
We got one tip in particular that said got a murder with the weapon being a hammer that broke.
We hadn't released that the weapon was a hammer, and certainly hadn't released that the hammer had broken. We figured this guy is either involved or he knows what happened inside this house.
I'm Detective Long, Homicide, Vegas PD. You had some information you wanted to give me about a murder.
The male identified himself as William Penix. They call him Big Will. He agrees to meet with police, and this is a man that's coming out of prison.
My friend Greyhound called me at work and said he wanted to talk to me.
Big Will said he tries to counsel these guys coming out of prison to help them to get back into society. One is a male he only knows as Noah or Greyhound.
He's not real sure what his real name is, but Greyhound is what he calls him, and he's a little out there, he's a little strange.
And Noah came to his apartment last night. They had a couple of beers.
He told me he killed a woman. He said, I hit her with a hammer over and over again.
He describes Greyhound as a black male in his late 30s who's slim and steals, but this is coming from Big Will.
Big Will tells detectives Greyhound is an elusive drifter who lives somewhere out in the desert.
While he seems really credible, his story is absolutely crazy.
Most suspects believe that they are smarter than we are. So he's maybe trying to divert us or get us off his trail and put us onto somebody else's trail. So we do pull Big Will's criminal record.
That's when detectives find a shocking similarity between Big Will's record and the murder of Shauna Tiafe.
His criminal record is major, and it indicates that he assaulted a woman and she almost died.
One day into the murder investigation of Shauna Tiafe, an unexpected tipster named Big Will comes forward with intimate knowledge of the crime. He says the murderer is a mysterious drifter named Greyhound. But when detectives run Big Will's record, they're shocked at what they find.
So he's maybe trying to get us off his trail and put us onto somebody else's trail. So we do pull Big Will's criminal record.
Big Will had been imprisoned for a strong-armed robbery where he and an accomplice had seriously injured a woman, nearly killing her.
Trust me.
Police asked Big Will to take a polygraph, and Big Will says absolutely.
Is there an issue with a man coming forward with really good information like this? Definitely. Could he be our suspect? Absolutely.
Did you serve 10 years for armed robbery and aggravated assault?
Yes, sir.
I hit him pretty hard. We accused him of the murder.
Did you bludgeon to death Shauna TFA?
No, sir.
He passes a polygraph, and the cops sort of believe him, and I sort of believe him, but the story is so fantastic.
Greyhound was a good friend, and I tried to do what I could to help him. And one day, we drinking some beer, and he said, "Hey, William, I need to talk to you."
Wanted to let you know that I hurt a woman pretty bad today.
He said, I hit her so hard, William, constantly, over and over, and eventually the hammer broke. But with Greyhound, you never could tell, because he wasn't that trustworthy. That morning when I seen it on TV, I said, Lord, have mercy. What the hell am I going to do about this? And the Lord said, William, turn their ass in. I turned Greyhound in because right is right, wrong is wrong. I was in prison 10 years, you understand? I just missed death row. I know how valuable it is to be alive each and every day.
The detectives asked, hey, do you have this guy Greyhound's cell phone number?
Better yet, I can take you where he hangs out.
From what we were being told is Noel goes to the Chevron every single day, buys his alcohol, buys food. So we pull up and we go into the Chevron. Big Will goes to his restroom. I grab a couple of waters, stand in line for the cashier. Big Will then grabs me from behind. He puts his hands on me, which I don't like.
Right there by the red car. That's Greyhound.
All right. A surveillance camera catches the encounter.
Greyhound is right where Big Will expected him to be, in Summerlin, hanging out by a gas station.
Detective Long makes his move.
I look at this man, and I know if he starts running, he's going to get away from me. So I'll get as close as I can to him, put my hands on him. The red car drives away. I said, I'm a detective, and I'm doing an investigation you may or may not help me with. Would you talk to me? And you can literally see him relax.
Sorry, I just want to talk. You have any weapons on you, or?
I can see a knife in his pocket. I says, would you mind if
At headquarters, Greyhound sits down for his first interview.
During the first interview, he wasn't putting up barriers. He was giving us information that I didn't expect him to give me. He's telling me about being a gangster in California. He got the nickname Greyhound because he could outrun the police.
They try to catch me, and I always outbeat them every time.
His criminal record is major. So I am pretty sure at this point that this is our man. I just need to build the case.
District Attorney Mark DiGiacomo observes the interview.
You could tell there was something just not right about this individual. He has a very odd affect to him. He laughs at inappropriate things. Everything about him was creepy.
And we start a conversation. He never asks what I'm investigating. So I'm like, how do you make money? He goes, well, a friend of mine who's a fireman, and I do a lot of work for him, his name is George.
He's a good guy, good friend of mine.
George TFA?
Yeah, George TFA, we're good friends, yeah.
And I'm like, holy cow. I cannot believe he's telling me this.
The story he's telling is, yeah, my best friend is George DFA, and Shauna loved me too, and they have me over to the house, and I would teach their 8-year-old to skateboard. I mean, he knew everything about these people.
You're like one of the family, huh?
I think so.
Did you know that Shauna was recently attacked?
No, I don't know about that. I don't know.
We finished the interview, and I said, I need to know where you live in case I have questions.
Out in the desert, I have a tent out there.
My thought is I need to get him into jail.
With no fixed address, Greyhound poses a significant flight risk.
I said, no, I need to have you available. So I'm going to arrest you for just a drug charge, and it's not a big deal.
Greyhound is taken to the Clark County Detention Center, where he's booked and his phone is seized.
From those records, we saw that he was communicating with a guy named Earl, who worked at the Chevron he was arrested at.
Earl was a cashier and also happened to drive a red car, which detectives now believe was the car Greyhound was next to when Detective Long intercepted him. Phone records prove Earl was also the first person Greyhound called on the morning of Shauna's murder at 7:40 a.m. The call to Earl pinged from the tower closest to the Chevron, physically placing Greyhound in close proximity to the crime scene.
We knew Earl somehow involved in our crime. When we checked into him, this Earl guy happened to have pawned Shauna TFA's ring earlier in September.
Hey, Earl.
Hey, what's going on?
I have a ring I need you to pawn for me.
Once we learned that, we thought something certainly is wrong here.
Greyhound's criminal records also reveal an eerily suspicious arrest near the Palms Casino, where Shauna worked.
I find out that Noel had been arrested on September 17, just 2 weeks prior to the murder. That area was having problems with stolen cars and burglaries. And 2 patrol officers saw him walking down the road in way too much dark clothing, and he's carrying a white bag. He sees them, he tries to hide. They walk back up, they find the bag, and it has a mask, gloves, a knife, and a hammer. And they arrested him for carrying burglary tools. So my thought process is he's trying to commit this murder beforehand.
This guy is not Lex Luthor. He's no evil genius. It was patently obvious that this guy was, close to intellectually disabled. I mean, he'd be lucky to figure out where his next meal is coming from, let alone plan a homicide. There's absolutely no way that Noel Stevens could do this on his own.
To reveal who helped Greyhound plan the murder, investigators dig into Greyhound's phone records.
We do have Noel Stevens' cellular phone. He is making phone calls using that phone, and the first ping is at 5:30 in the morning.
The GPS data from the phone reveals Noel was near the same Chevron gas station where he was first picked up by Detective Long. Surveillance footage from the gas station confirms the phone records.
So at this point, we have our timeline down to somewhere between 3:30 in the morning when Shauna was coming home from work, and 5:30 in the morning, Noel is at the Chevron gas station making another phone call.
That's narrowed the time period down for us.
Greyhound agrees to show police where he lives, a campsite in the desert, just 3 miles outside of Las Vegas city limits. Investigators get a warrant to search it.
We go out there, and Detective Miller noticed the bottoms to a bathing suit, and she remembered seeing the top to that bikini in Shauna's bedroom. But the most important thing they found was a little tag to a hammer. They sent detectives down to Lowe's and found out only Lowe's sold this hammer. They scanned the number of times this hammer's been sold, checked the video, and they see on September 7th, Noel Stevens buying a wood-handled claw hammer.
As the search area widens around the desert, they come across a shocking discovery.
Hey, I found something.
And a couple of 100 feet outside of camp, there is a pair of jeans that are rolled up. And when they unroll the jeans, they're covered in what appears to be blood. They take that to the lab on a rush, and within hours, they know that the blood on those jeans is Shauna Tiafe's, and that the wearer profile, the sweat that's in the waistband of the jeans, is Noel Stevens. And based on that, they now know for sure Noel Stevens killed Shauna Tiafe.
Detective Long returns to Greyhound's jail cell with pictures of the damning evidence.
So I showed him the photographs. You could see the surprise on his face. He said he wanted an attorney present. So all questioning ended. I got up to leave the interview room, and Noel said, without prompting,
I want a lawyer, I was double-crossed.
In that instant, all the pieces fell together for Detective Long.
So Noel is telling me that he has a crime partner, in his words, double-cross him. But he's not the one that wants her dead. In my opinion, he's not smart enough to plan this out. How did he get inside the house? The only person to have access to a key to Shauna Tiafe's house would be George Tiafe. Who wants Shauna dead? They're going through a divorce. Shauna is having sex with another man. George Tiafe is the hero. He's the fireman. He's the one everybody looks up to. Your wife is sleeping with another man? All of it added together is indicating to me, and just me at this point, it is George Tiafe. Murder for hire is extremely hard to prove. So there were several things that I needed done. I want a surveillance team put on George Tiafe to follow him.
5 days into the investigation, detectives order phone records and a search warrant for George's house.
Upstairs in his bedroom, we started going through the receipts, and all of a sudden we come across Lowe's, 6 keys. Huh. We call a detective, hey, could you run over to this Lowe's? And it's a different Lowe's than Noel bought the hammer at. And see if they still got video? Well, they do. They have video, and there's George Tiafe. He's copying keys with the daughter. We go to the text messages, and there's a text right before he does that where Shauna says, hey, I need my spare key back. Can you please drop it off? And he responds, yep, I'll give it to you in the morning. Never tells her he made 6 copies of her key.
Detectives cross-check George's phone records against Greyhound's records. The results are shocking.
The phone records indicated that there was a huge amount of contact between George and Noel Stevens.
They're talking daily. It's like every hour they're talking.
Also, when he went to jail on the 17th, the phone calls he made were to George. And George is the one that came and picked him up.
Before Noel goes down to the Palms on the several occasions, there's a series of contacts between Noel and George by phone, and a lot of contact, which is a pretty good indication that this is not one person acting alone, but that there's a conspiracy.
Detective Long decides to put the squeeze on George.
I still don't have George saying anything. He's going to deny everything. I want to and we are going to arrest George Tiafe for the murder of Shauna Tiafe.
What? No, there's no evidence. There's no evidence. There's no evidence.
And they were shocked.
You guys have to leave. You have to leave.
I know that this.
Get out. You need to leave. Get out.
Less than an hour later, dispatch calls Detective Long.
I get a call from the surveillance team. He said, "What did you do?"
I didn't say anything to him. What's going on?
He goes, well, George, who always drives extremely conservative, obeys every traffic law, is driving, quote unquote, like a bat out of hell.
Okay, now we're up to 95, stand by.
He said he's passing everybody, forcing people off the road. And I'm like, oh no, did I push too hard?
All right, be advised. Okay, he's on the shoulder.
He said he's just forced another car off the road. He's doing 80, and the freeway ends in a block wall.
Now look out. Look, he just broke through a barricade.
So he drives through 2 wooden barriers and then hits a cement barrier doing 76 miles an hour. The sergeant who I'm talking to on the phone says he just committed suicide. And it was just dead silence.
Nine days after Shauna Tiafe's murder, investigators believe they've found the killer, a drifter that goes by the name Greyhound. Now they're zeroing in on Shauna's husband, George, who could be the mastermind behind the murder. When George gets word that detectives are questioning his family, he knows he's in their crosshairs.
They said that they were going to arrest you.
George is driving, quote unquote, like a bat out of hell.
Yeah, look, he just broke through a barricade.
He's doing 76 miles an hour. He hits a cement barrier, demolishes his truck, and the sergeant tells me he just committed suicide. And it was just dead silence. And I'm panicking at this point. You can't commit suicide. And then the sergeant came back on and said, nope, he's crawling out the window. I'm like, oh, my God.
160/80.
I think he's all right. Seems like nothing major is damaged.
They do not put him into trauma because there's no broken bones, so they put him in the burn unit, which is a secured part of the hospital, because they know that we're looking at him.
By the 11th day after Shauna's body was found, George Tiafe and Noel Stevens, a.k.a. Greyhound, are both arrested for first-degree murder.
There's no way out of this for Noel. I mean, he's stuck. He killed her. But he might be able to help himself, maybe, by assisting in the investigation.
It becomes my job to see if I can get Noel to tell us a story.
What if we take the death penalty off the table?
And so eventually we reach an agreement, and shortly after, he begins cooperating in full. As crazy as Noel is, this guy's memory is about as good as anybody's I've ever had contact with. He tells this very long, detailed story.
Everything is on video. Everything is timestamped.
He was able to say, look, right before I went and got arrested, we had gone to the Target. Here's what we purchased. And after I got arrested, the first thing I did was go to George, and we went back to that Target store and bought the exact same hammer.
So there's stamps on the receipts, and then we have the last 4 of the credit card indicating George's credit card.
You can actually see the two of them arguing over what hammer to buy.
Detectives believe it was a text from Shauna on September 15th, 14 days before the murder, that sealed her fate.
She says to him, look, once we made the decision to separate, we should have both known this was never going to work out.
No!
I think she came to the realization that she was going to be happier alone.
Greyhound, George, call me back!
Immediately after that text, phone records show George tried to call Greyhound 11 times.
I think what caused George to increase his pressure on Noel is the concept that he could go back to court and he could lose either partial or all custody of the daughter.
George was a control freak. I think that he knew that he was losing control of his wife and his family.
Come on, let's go.
He felt like this was his only way out. And if he couldn't control her, then nobody could.
For George, Noel Stevens was a pawn in his master plan.
George has made him feel important, has made him feel loved in a way, has given him money and odd jobs working around the house, and this is the least that he can do to repay him in a twisted way.
And that's exactly what happened during the early morning hours of September 29th.
Noel already has the key that George had made for him, and so he goes over to the residence somewhere around 10 or 11 at night, just in case she gets off early, and he lets himself into the residence. He hears at 3:30 the garage door open. He then goes and hides in the bathroom. He comes out. Shauna turns. The only thing that she says is, "Why?" And he starts hitting her. And he just repeatedly hit her in the head till she stopped moving. And he said the sign for George that it was done is that he left the garage door open. And so he runs out of the house. As he's running, he's going through the pink bag. Her cell phone's in there, and he throws it on the side of the road with her makeup kit. He buries the murder weapon. Then he runs north to a Chevron. He's caught on camera at about 5:34 in the morning.
Oh, wait for me, Maddie.
George, being the coward that he is, used his kid as cover for him in finding her body.
He knew that there was a gruesome scene. He knew that sending in his daughter was the worst thing for her.
To this day, I can't get my mind around that. When I told Noel Stevens that he took that girl into the scene, Noel Stevens got angry.
According to Noel's testimony, he and George were supposed to meet out in the desert the following day. Investigators also find out George had just purchased a gun.
All right, okay, George, I'll see you soon. Okay.
If Noel Stevens meets with George TFA 6 o'clock the day after the homicide, and George does drive him out to the desert and kill him, this case probably never gets solved.
Excuse me, is your name Noel?
Because Big Will came forward and helped detectives find Noel so quickly, he not only helped catch the killers, he also saved another life.
It was just my chance to redeem myself. Even though I didn't know Shauna or her family, I had to bring justice to her.
January 7th, 2013, Noel Greyhound Stevens pleads guilty and is sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. On October 25th, 2015, George TFA's trial begins. Greyhound testifies against him.
The jury was out for a couple days. They eventually came back and convicted George of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon. When you put the story that we had next to those phone records, you could follow both George and Noel for about 3 months. Those phone records were devastating to him. And because George TFA used his daughter to find his wife, the jury gave him life without the possibility of parole.
My sentence is based on the fact that this was just pure evil.
There is resolution in that justice is served, but closure for Shauna's family, certainly they've lost their loved one. And for Maddie, she has to grow up now without a mother or a father. I think it's the saddest case I've covered yet. Shauna, despite her outward appearance, her bubbly personality, was in trouble, and she couldn't escape.
We had a gathering in my home. We released balloons with messages and to celebrate her life and to let her know that she was just loved.